All right, my English teacher friends, I have a really good one up my sleeve today for you. So I'm going to show you an alternative grading method that kind of gets at about 4 or 5 different birds with one stone. So many of you are aware of the fact that I did a couple of webinars with the National Writing Project where we took a look at the existential crisis known as ChatGPT, and a number of my students wrote live against the ChatGPT, and basically we had a battle royal between ChatGPT essays and students incorporating and pulling the strings of my templates. And it was pretty clear at night's end that kids that use my templates can outperform any essay that ChatGPT creates. But one of the things I'm also known for in the ELA circles are my alternative grading methods. So in this video, I want to show you one where we equip the ChatGPT with a box of crayons and have my students write against the ChatGPT. I'll get into my philosophy of why I use alternative grading methods, and then I'll also show you before the end of this video how I would grade a stack of synthesis essays that I assigned for my on-level sophomores. So without further ado, let's get into this. So I think that alternative grading methods are a game changer for a number of reasons. One, I think that since the one-room schoolhouse, we really haven't changed the paradigm upon which that we grade. And here's how it typically looks, and you'll probably agree with me on this. Student writes essay, they submit it to us, we sit on it begrudgingly for a week or two or three or four. Some of us take a while to get through that because we don't look forward to it. There's no joy in grading work. And then we sacrifice our evenings and our weekends, and we get into this compulsory unpaid overtime where we're grading instead of living our lives. And then we have work-life imbalances, and it's just no good. And then we put copious amounts of notes on a student's essay, and we hand it back. Student does another essay, and we're writing the same old stuff time after time after time. Traditional grading methods do not yield much growth or maturation in student writers, and the onus is on us. So 99% of what is done in the traditional grading paradigm falls on the teacher's shoulder, and that's why I contend it does not work. So that's the big thing, the downsides of traditional grading. We got to split that onus. We got to put more on our students. And in the alternative grading method that I'm going to show you in just a second here, we're going to make that onus about 75% on the student, 25% on the teacher. Look at what happens to learning when you shift that teeter-totter balance. And then the big thing is, take a look at how students set their learning targets for themselves. What do they actually learn about themselves as writers by taking an alternative approach? And then the big one, I always contend this, and you know, sometimes, you know, teachers might say, oh, Christian's lazy. No. I firmly believe that students need to do the heavy lifting in order for learning to occur. If we're doing all the lifting for them, they're not going to grow, mature, or flourish as writers. It's kind of like the parenting paradigm. If we treat our students the way that, if we treat our kids the way that we treat our students, we're really going to have some enabled kids. So we got to share the responsibility, share the onus. So here's the setup and guideline for this ChatGPT color Crayola alternative grading method. So each student submits their draft to a square. So I put the desk in squares. So four desks in a square. And I call it Think Pair Square. I equip each student with a box of crayons, and I just head to Walmart. I buy many boxes of 25-cent crayons. It's not an expensive endeavor. My school budget covers it. Each draft is reviewed by 3 peers. So hence you got, it's yourself and 3 peers at the quad. So 3 peers are going to look at it. And then you color code accordingly. So basically what I've done is I have color coded arrangements for my template, and I'll show you that in just a second. And then the students are appraising their work, their peers' work, and their own work, and there are some appraisal steps that happen. So through the absence and presence of color, students are going to know exactly the good, the bad, the ugly of their work. And to demonstrate this for you, because I know some of you are not that familiar with my templates, I'll show you how I would grade a stack of essays for a particular assignment that I created for my on-level sophomores. And the title of the essay is A Bit of Life Advice for Our Friend Eeyore. So we have a heavy SEL component in my district, and we incorporate it a lot into our assessments. And this is an assignment that I made to help kind of synthesize everything together, link everything together of our SEL teachings and our compositional teachings. So it's called A Bit of Life Advice to Our Friend Eeyore. Here's the prompt. Our dear friend Eeyore is really down on his luck and is feeling beyond meh at the moment. Things just feel bleak and heavy for him. In fact, he just sent you a text that reads, I was so upset I forgot to be happy. Read the following sources and accompanying material carefully. Write a letter to Eeyore giving him a bit of advice on how to find a slice of happiness in his day. Draw from at least three of the sources. So we had 7 sources, and it's just a traditional synthesis paper a la FRQ1 from AP Lang. I mean, you could even do this with an AP Lang class if you wanted to. So just a straight up nuts and bolts synthesis paper. So I won't describe what we did in terms of setting this all up. I'm just going to show you how I broke down the writing for students. So when you ask the question, how do I write the introductory paragraph? I have 2 templates, the declarative thesis and the inverted thesis. And here's how I break them down. And with the declarative model, you begin with the thesis. Like, give your advice to Eeyore right out of the gate. From there, you sprinkle in a little bit of context and background. And then again, for those that are familiar with my work, you've heard me say this 1,000 times. And those that are new to me, just go back into some of my YouTube videos if you want to take a deeper dive into what I'm going to drop right now. I run things called word study academies and nuance academies in my classroom with all of my students. Word Study Academy is just my vocabulary instructional techniques to help students fill the vocabulary void. By Tier 2 level vocabulary, I just mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber word. It's an academic paper, so there should be a little bit of Tier 2, but here's the kicker. You're writing to your friend Eeyore, who's a little down and out on his luck. So you probably don't want to overly geek out and be pedantic, and otherwise you might sound like you have a pompous tone or something like that, or you're condescending Eeyore. That's typically what happens if you use too many $1 million words on a friend, right? They're going to tune you out. So we got to be careful. So there's going to be a good balance here of a little Tier 2, but probably some colloquial and vernacular in there. Sentence constructs is a concept that comes from my Nuance Academy. I love Strunken White's text called Write It Right. In it, they have something called rule number 18, and they espouse the idea that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. So you're going to see my students make some nifty syntactical choices in their writing in the hopes of achieving voice, rhythm, and flow. And then the other kicker of my templates is this last thing here. 4 sentences long. An introductory paragraph is going to be 4 sentences long as you are using my template. So 4 sentences. Begin with thesis, context, background, Tier 2, sentence constructs, 4 sentences. But you can flip the template on its head and go inverted. And this is where students might begin with a hook or an analogy, or just simply start with the context and background. And as they funnel it down towards the 4th sentence, hold the life advice, hold the thesis until the 4th sentence. But you're going to do the same thing. Check off Tier 2, check off sentence constructs, 4 sentences. So let's take a look at a couple, and then I'll show you how I would grade these. Hey, buddy, I'm so sorry to hear that you are down on your luck, but here's the thing. You don't have to stay stuck in your discomfort and unhappiness. In many ways, your negativity is begetting more negativity. It's more or less a vicious cycle that you will need to learn how to break free from. And you're lucky to have a friend in me to show you the way through these dark times. So this is simple nuts and bolts thesis here, right? So you want to have, a friendly tone because Eeyore is a little melancholic, and you're giving him life advice in a gentle way. And it's like any old thesis that a kid will ever write for synthesis. You're front loading. That's it. right? Drop your thesis, make it clear. Look at these sentence constructs. Look at the vocab. I like the word beginning and vicious, right? So good vocab, good, syntactical manipulation. It works. For a straight up, either declare or invert. It doesn't matter. Here's number 2. Hi, Eeyore. If you're receptive to it, I'd like to give you a few tips and tricks so that you can find a slice of happiness in your day. So I'm going to pause here. One of the things we learned in writing this, and I Bob Rossed it for the kids. I wrote a number of examples for them. If you start off with the advice, it's kind of like a slap in the face. It's a little too brusque and abrupt. It's a little abrasive when you do that. So we found the easiest way to do this, the gentlest way to do this, is to invert. So I think all the ones that we're going to look at in this video invert. Having known you for years, it's clear that you have adapted several unhelpful thinking styles that keep you locked in bleak and dark patterns that blot the sunshine from entering your life. Ideally, I would like to get you to think about your thinking so that you could cultivate your higher self and find some gratitude. Life need not be so painful. So you're dropping the seeds of your line of reasoning. So my guys, for on-level sophomores, we did 4 paragraphs for this: intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion. And this kid nicely front-loaded where they're going, right? To cultivate your higher self and find some gratitude. So we're going to have a paragraph on the cultivation, and then we're going to have a paragraph on gratitude. Just dropping your seeds, right? Quintessential, classic, inverted thesis. Life need not be so painful. That easy. Here's one more. My dearest friend, you first need to know that you are loved so much. I'm intent on helping you to feel better, so I'm going to give you my 2 cents and offer some concrete advice in this letter. Ultimately, I'd like to teach you ways to monitor how your words create your reality. So we're going to have a paragraph on that. So be impeccable with your words. We read the 4 agreements together. And lastly, I know that you will be 1,000,000 times happier if you accept the following toolbox of tricks that help folks feel happier and less stressed, anxious, and down. So we're going to be talking in that next paragraph about a toolbox of certain things. And this kid talked about havening techniques and tapping, EFT, yoga, mindfulness, things of that nature. All right, so that in a nutshell is my declarative and inverted thesis. How do we grade these? So, kids write all these essays, and I have 58 on-level sophomores, so that's going to take me a few evenings and weekends to grade these. So here's what I did, all right? Real quickly here, I'll tell you what I did. They submitted the essays to me, and the only thing I did was I read them, and on a notepad, I wrote down the grade I think the kid deserves, the grade I think the kid earned, just based on the merits of their writing. I give the essays back to them, put them in that think pair square quad construction of their desk, and then give them their box of crayons. And this is what we do. If your peer wrote a declarative thesis, underline it in red. If they wrote an inverted thesis, underline it in green. And here's the reason why. Red symbolizing stop, mean green go. I contend that the students who wrote the declarative theses they sound too tough love. It sounds too mean, too harsh in the language. So in all the declaratives that I saw, every single kid needed to revise it because the tone didn't meet the demands of the assignment. It would be like anxiety inducing to Eeyore to be spoken to in that manner. And it was true across the board. I had a few kids declare and it just didn't work. So underline the inverted in green if they did that. And then some students, hopefully with me Bob Rossing as much as I do and painting exemplars and models with the students, all my students know how to write a thesis at this stage of the game, but green meant go, red meant stop. You probably needed to revise a little bit. Instead of me taking those essays and spending my evening and weekends, going over it and giving the advice, they're hearing it from their peers, and then maybe they even identified it themselves, which is true learning. So next thing, maintaining an academic tone is important. Underline each tier 2 level words your peer used in their essay in purple. And here's a takeaway, because I've already done this exercise with my students. Some students completely overdid the tier 2. and they sound a little contrived. It sounds pretentious. It sounds pompous. And I really need to disabuse some of my students of the following idea, that if they use a million dollar words, that is the equivalent of good writing. So in this paper, you don't want to have a ton of purple, but a little. So in some places, given the sources, there's some clinical advice that you could give Eeyore, and so you want to use the clinical language. But it's not all about the million dollar words. This paper lends itself to the use of the colloquial and vernacular. Underline instances of this usage in orange. Right? So I really want them to teeter-totter balance that voice, right? Even with my on-level sophomores, I'm always going for that elusive unicorn sophistication point that AP teachers talk about. Even with on-level sophomores, I want them to have that degree of sophistication. And then another thing that I have them look at, typically one wants to avoid parallel sentence structures unless there's a deliberate intention to do so. Underline successive parallel sentences in brown. So my students have gone through my Nuance Academy, and we've learned all things Strunk and White. And one tendency among my struggling and emerging writers is that they tend to overuse independent clauses or short, simple declarative sentences. So when I read their work, it sounds like da-da, 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 da-da. So I want to bring their attention to that rhythm, that droning tone that they create through their sentence constructs. So if a student has a lot of brown in their essay, it's probably a good idea to go back and revise, or for me to give them some exercises in Strunk and White so that they can learn the 12 sentence constructs. So a lot of brown is not a good thing. So usually your brown sentences, I would explain to students, are where you're declaring something, right? When you use independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences, typically, not always, you're declaring something. So maybe in the conclusion of a syllogism, or when you're dropping your thesis, you want to be a little bit more assertive. So you would have a brown sentence, but by and large, you tend to avoid that. So let's take a look at the rhythm and flow. As we know, overusing the short, simple declarative sentence impedes this from happening. Underline each short, simple declarative sentence in the essay in gray. So getting really into whether or not a student has good flow with their sentence constructs, really getting their nose into their syntactical choices with this. And again, do I need to spend my evenings and weekends going through entire essays looking for this stuff, or can I put the onus on the students and have them teach each other and ultimately teach themselves? And then only with regards to the introductory paragraph, leave your peer a comment or two. What are they doing well? How are they doing? What's working? What needs tweaking? So the student will get their paper back and 3 of their peers will have left them commentary. Now here's the deal. At the end of this alternative grading method, the student's going to submit their paper to me, and I will have those 3 comments. I also will have the student who owns the paper comment in regards to the comment, and then I will have a conversation with them. And that, my friends, is the big ka-ching. Traditional grading methods is a one-way conversation. We are talking to the kids, and most of them don't even read our comments if we're going to be honest with ourselves. They look at the grade and they're like, I love Mr. Kuhn, he gave me a 98, or Mr. Kuhn's the biggest jerk in the world, he gave me a 72. So they internalize this, as if we're doing to them instead of them earning and deserving. So it's a great way to have a conversation with students about the good, the bad, the ugly with regards to their writing, and they take ownership. And if just based on looking at introductions, students are doing about 75% of the work, right? I'll do about 25%. That's how learning occurs. Here's another thing that we'll look at as part of my Nuance Academy, and this is all the magic of having templates. You have shared language and key things that students can hone in on, right? If you have word study academies, Nuance Academies, templates, it has to be very uniform though. So this is something that we talk about a lot in my Nuance Academy. To be verbs yield a super passive voice and also hamper diction. Underline each to be verb that is used in the essay in black. Was, were, am, is, are, been, being, be, are the derivations of to be. If a student has a whole bunch of to be in there, then they probably have a super passive voice, very limited vocab, and they probably also by default have far too many independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences. To be's are necessary. I don't want to have students thinking that they can never use to be verbs, but if you over rely on them, it really kind of stupefies the writing and dumbs it down quite a bit. So to be active and to wield a certain confidence in your tone, you got to limit those to be verbs. So that's a good exercise for them to see if they need to be a little crisper with their diction. And then both the declarative and inverted thesis should only be 4 sentences long, no more, no less. Place a big X through the introduction if they did not follow this direction. So believe it or not, I Bob Ross my instruction all the time. And in order to write this essay for my on-level sophomores, I wrote the introduction 4 times for them. And I showed them each time. I said I inverted every single time. And I showed them a declarative, as one of my 4, and they all agreed, like, yeah, it's a little brass. That's it's kind of harsh, in your tone. So inverted is the way to go. And in my modeling, I always say 4 sentences. That some Yahoo, some knucklehead is going to submit like an 11-sentence introduction. They don't pay attention. They're not following rules. So I don't want to deal with that frustration. They can catch themselves. Their peers can catch them not paying attention. I don't need ownership over that. So how do you write the body paragraphs? I'm going to show you the template that I use for my body paragraphs, which is called the syllogistic method. It comes from Aristotle, and Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum. And the aristocratic boys would go there, the rich town boys, to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And they'd often tussle with these questions like, what is justice? Which is the essential question to Plato's Republic. And these great philosophical think tankers would step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of justice. And then they would all gather around and tear it apart, and someone else would come and that'd get torn apart. And they would just go around for days and days and days arguing about what justice is. And Aristotle, like us composition teachers, said, geez, why is it that some students are really gifted orators and others are meh, and some just tank bomb their debates? They lose systematically. And one day he had a eureka moment. He said, I got it. Aha. The students that think very cogently, that was his word, so lockstep, logical, reason, mathematical, computative, the students who are really good orators think in mathematical terms. They're calculative. So they argue from premise, conclusion. So if I were to say premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. You'd all say, yeah, Christian, that's really sad, but that's really well reasoned. That's logical. That makes sense. And when our kids argue, we want them to be that cogent. We want them to be that lockstep. But here's the kicker for synthesis. Most of our students only present the second premise, which is the textual support. They regurgitate all the sources they've read, and they just basically retell the story of the sources. It's a 3-step process that looks like this. So the first premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. So up top in the thesis, we don't give our reasons why to Eeyore, right? We're just giving direction. We're dropping the seeds of our line of reasoning. In the first premise, we're going to state why. Why are we giving Eeyore this advice? And this move right here is going to be 3 sentences long, and I'll model that for you in just a second. Premise 2 is going to be the teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing. We have to use at least 3 sources. Keep that in mind. So quoting and paraphrasing, the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay. The conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph is where we link it all back to the thesis and the prompt. All of this will take about 10 to 12 sentences. That's what I like to see in a body paragraph. Shoot for 10 sentences, cap it at 12. So let me show you how my students would write this. All right, simple training wheels for on-level sophomores. I say, state, there are many reasons why. and then they drop their why reason. For your real struggling and emerging writer, I like to keep it as concrete as possible. Take all the abstraction out. So look at this. There are many reasons why you find yourself saddled with these negative emotions, but chief among them is the fact that you do not yet realize the power of your words. All right, so the first premise is a promise. So we just promised the reader, we're going to talk about Eeyore's language. We're going to talk about him not being impeccable with his words. Language creates reality, and reality is ultimately a manifestation of the energy we create. So we're going to talk about how Eeyore is creating his bleak existence through his words. To become happier, you first need to become more mindful and intentional with the words you use. All right, we just promised words. We got to talk about words. So 3 sentences to set that up. And the reason why I advise that within my template, it all goes back to the College Board. FRQ1, AP Lang, they say 3 times in the directions. The centrality of your argument is a must. So if a kid takes 3 sentences to lay down the reason why, it is almost a surefire guarantee that they're going to stay central. Instead of regurgitating the sources or paraphrasing the sources, in which they lose the centrality of their argument as soon as they do that, they have a centralized argument from which to wield the rest of the syllogistic body paragraph. So 4th sentence begins the second premise, and get into it. Look at this. Take, for example, your hit song, Nobody Wants to Be My Friend. The opening stanza is a perfect case in point in that you attest that nobody wants to be your friend, what's a donkey to do, except for Winnie the Pooh. Let me answer your rhetorical question. Focus on your prepositions. The word except is so important in your language. So why are these good quotes? Why is this perfect? Because we promised the reader that we were going to talk about the impeccability of words, and we're analyzing Eeyore's words. This is fantastic. We're talking about prepositions. Your lyrics repeat this word so many times as you enumerate all of the friends whom love you. In psychology, 10 unhelpful thinking styles have been identified, and unfortunately, your thinking and emotional patterns gravitate towards 7 of these tendencies without fail. Here it is. You engage in all of the following: all or nothing thinking, minimization and catastrophic thinking. Your mental filter is skewed. You overgeneralize. You systematically disqualify the positive, etc. Source B. All right, so we know we have to use 3 sources. We got 2 so far. If you focus on the weight of your words, this could all self-correct. In brief, you need to learn how to be more impeccable with your words, and learn that in expressing yourself impeccably is to express yourself in the direction of truth and love. This includes expressing love, respect, and acceptance for self. Source C. All right, so one of the things in my template is that there's a template within the template. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student has a quote and they place a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote, so look at all these words in front of this quote, and you keep the quote small, it should sound conversational. So I don't like it when students drop a period and then dump a quote right after that. That's not good. That's not sophisticated. So the 5-word rule is nice. So, all right, did we talk about the impeccability of word in all of our sources? Yes, 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 yes. So we have a line of reasoning. Conclusion, let's go back to the prompt. Let's go back to the thesis. So let's begin by having you say the following. Many people want to be my friend because I am a fantastic and lovely person with much to offer the world. Be careful of how you cloak your language. Your happiness depends upon it. The whole thing talked about word. So that is an example of a syllogistic body paragraph. Let me show you what happens when you use templates like the syllogistic method. The questions kids are going to ask. What do I do next? Well, check this out. You're going to do it all over again. 3-sentence first premise, just change the why reason. Change your quotes and paraphrases. Conclude it the same way. Shoot for 10 to 12 sentences. So in a 4-paragraph essay, that's pretty easy peasy. There's many reasons that you can give Eeyore to help him in his, bleak and dour ways, and to uplift him. So if we're grading this, right, going back to the quads, going back to the crayon, going back to the robot, look at this. In the margin of the essay, write down how many sentences the syllogisms are. As we know, in order to have sufficient textual support and analysis, we need to have approximately 10 to 12 sentences. Again, I model that all day long, but kids just don't follow directions sometimes. I got some apathetic learners. I'm not, I don't have a perfect utopic classroom, but why do I need to, deal with my frustration and, spend my evenings and weekends telling a kid, hey, we don't do 4-sentence baggers anymore, 10 to 12 sentences, right? Good, pithy, substantive body paragraphs. You got to argue something. Since this is a synthesis paper, we know that the first premise should be 3 sentences long in order to keep the centrality of the argument. In the margin of the paper, do 2 things. Write down the number of sentences the first premise is, and also state what the why reason is. So this is really cool to have 3 peers look at that first premise and in their own words be able to write down the why reason. Immediately, if a kid does not have a clearly articulated why reason, the 3 peers are going to tell that writer, hey, you don't have a clear why reason. I don't know the promise of your first premise. I don't know where you're going. So again, this is the glory, this is the beauty of templates and having a unified language. My students are talking my language, and it's beautiful. It's very easy to grade and very easy to have conversations about writing when you equip kids with templates. And looking at the why reason, draw a line to its corresponding quote or paraphrase. If the line of reasoning is not clear, please let your peer know of this in the margins of their essay. So I'd go back to this and really show them, your promise is words. Here you're talking about prepositions, so that's a line for sure. You're into Don Miguel Ruiz's The Impeccability of Speech, so that's about words. And then you're into these mental mindsets that all have to deal with how language creates reality. So all of these are germane to the promise, and I use that word a lot. Have your quotes and paraphrases be germane to the promise. And so that's a really cool trick, and then they can have a conversation among the 4 of them as to whether or not they're keeping the line of reasoning. Smooth quote transitions are important to achieve flow and rhythm. Remember the 5-word rule. Underline the words they've placed before each quote in blue. So immediately, if a kid is quote dumping or they have really abrupt quote transitions, the blue is going to indicate it. The absence or the presence of it is going to indicate how well they are doing with their quote transitions. And of course, you got to teach kids how to bracket and all that stuff. Sometimes a student will stretch their vocabulary outside of their natural wheelhouse. In every instance whereby the diction seems forced, contrived, or out of bounds, place an X through those words. So again, I do have a lot of kids that invent words. They talk, out of their britches a little bit too much. And in this paper in particular, you don't want to do that to Eeyore because that can come off as being condescending and arrogant. So we're going to put an X through those words. So if a peer thinks the word's too big or doesn't sound natural or just doesn't fit, we're going to put X's through that. So that way the owner of the paper can look at their diction and say, how am I doing? And let's deal with those awkward and confusing sentences. Circle these in red. So I got 3 kids reading one paper. If any one sentence is really confusing, circle it in red. Again, I don't need to take ownership of that all the time, right? The kids can do the heavy lifting. One should hold off on offering textual support until the 3rd or 4th sentence so as to keep the argument central. In the margins of the paper, indicate the sentence by which your peer first offers direct textual support. In my example that I showed you, it comes in the 4th sentence. And staying true to the template, the textual support should come in the 4th sentence. But what happens is kids will do it in the 1st sentence, and they're beginning with the 2nd premise. You're going to have a logical fallacy. There's no line of reasoning, and you're not going to have, a centralized argument to defend and your argument, and not enough textual support in order to defend an argument. At the end of the syllogism, you have the option to write kept or not kept. It's up to you to decide. Was the promise of the first premise kept? Give a brief explanation. So again, I'm going to be reading all of this stuff at the end of this exercise. It's a conversation, right? Traditional grading is not that conversational. It's a one-sided street. So in alternative grading methods, I want there to be more of a discourse between student and teacher. And I'm a big believer of this. The more writing a student sees, the better they become. So in this exercise, they're looking at 4 essays, including their own. And then the overall reflection. Each of the 3 peers share a few thoughts with the author, right? What are your overall impressions? What's working well? What needs to be tweaked? So the 3 peers, the 3 peer editors, are going to leave some comments for the author. And then we return the essay to the owner. Here's a couple of things that I want my students to do. I tell them that I've read their essays already and that I wrote down a grade. And I say, in exactly 5 sentences, state the grade you deserve. And the kicker here, why? So 5 sentences, tell me why you deserve a grade. And then if we are within 5 points of each other, I will give them the higher grade. So let's say Peter gives himself an 88 and I wrote down 92. We're within 5 points. I'm going to give Peter the 92. But let's say Samantha says, 110 and I said 71. We're going to have a conversation about that. So I have time allotted during my my instruction to have one-on-one conferences with kids. And you'd be surprised, you do this enough, kids take it very seriously and they're often harder on themselves than I am. And if there's a grade discrepancy, it's typically because a kid went too low and they're too hard on themselves. And then the big one is indicate 3 learning targets. Based on all that peer feedback, write down 3 things you're going to do to improve the paper. Or if we jump into the next subsequent paper, what are 3 things? What are 3 takeaways from this exercise that you're really going to focus on to become a better writer? So that is it, my color-coded robot alternative grading method. So in terms of running that, I have block schedules, so we have 83-minute blocks. Takes me about 70 minutes to run through that. And so you guys that are on a traditional bell schedule, you might need 2 blocks in order to do that. So if you like what you see, keep in mind that National Writing Project and I are hosting an alternative grading methods 2-hour intensive March 11th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to do it live in Zoom. So given that it's with the National Writing Project, they award professional development badges. So if you are in need of professional development hours, their badge affords you 2 hours of completion. And during our time together, I probably will, I've done this many times in the past. I can probably get through about 20 alternatives. So I always encourage teachers, come with a heaping stack of paper. At the end of our 2 hours together, you will have them all graded and you will have a bevy, an arsenal of alternative grading methods that will free up your evenings and weekends so that you're not subjecting yourselves to compulsory unpaid overtime. So hopefully you like this one and you can use it. And I'm telling you, befriend a template. It saves you a world of harm. And I like my work-life balance, and I think it's all because of my alternative grading methods and my templates. It really frees me up. And I don't feel overburdened by the demands of my job as a result of these things. So hope to see you March 11th. If you need anything, reach out. My email is teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. To get more information on that alternative grading methods course, you can go to my webpage at teachingwrite.com. You can sign up there and get the Zoom links. And there's a ton of other stuff on that website, some free content and some stuff that is not for free. So www.teachingwrite.com, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. Happy teaching, happy writing.